In just 1 year, Traoré turned a local dairy idea into a clean milk system serving over 14,000 children across 5 African nations. Without foreign aid, without refrigeration trucks, and without permission. A European trade representative whispers, stunned, "That's not possible, even our labs don't have this tech." But cows graze peacefully behind him. A ribbon falls. Applause erupts. They didn't see this coming. Stick around to see how one bottle changed everything. Share where you're listening from below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. As the final section of the $2 billion dairy facility opened, farmers cried, children clapped, government officials stood frozen, trying to process what had just been unveiled. In the distance, robotic arms loaded crates of freshly sealed milk cartons stamped with the name Faso Kosam. Not powdered milk, not imported, fresh, cold, pure, and entirely Burkina. Traoré didn't walk in from the stage. He walked in from the side, unnoticed by the press. No podium, no military salute, just his boots and a soft smile. He shook the hands of workers first, then looked up at the banner that hung proudly above. Nourishing Burkina. One glass at a time. An older herder named Bako leaned close and whispered, "You did it, Captain. We all did it together." 1 year earlier, this land had been a patch of dust. Villagers used to say, only termites could survive here. European investors wrote it off as low-yield terrain. But now this was ground zero for what the French press was calling the agricultural miracle of the century. Only no miracle had happened. Just vision and work. Inside the plant, Western delegates toured the facility. Some had hands behind their backs, others folded arms. They passed rows of chilled fermentation tanks operated by AI-regulated solar cores. Dutch executives whispered to each other, "How are they storing without nitrogen pumps?" A German agricultural analyst muttered, "Those aren't even our machines." They weren't. Every machine, every design had been built under Traoré's strict condition. No imported systems that required dependency. The plant was not just a factory, it was a message. Suddenly, one of the visitors dropped his tablet. It had detected a proprietary filter system capable of removing 98% of bacteria without electricity. His voice shook as he asked, "Where did this come from?" The tour guide, a young Borinab woman in a white lab coat, smiled. "From here. Designed in Ouagadougou, built by our own." Back outside, dozens of local dairy farmers stood behind a green banner. They weren't just cheering, they were singing. A song their grandparents used to chant during harvest season, a song now reborn. Traoré stepped toward the stage for a brief statement. No grand speeches, just a few words. "Europe doubted us, but cows don't know doubt. Land doesn't know politics, and dignity doesn't ask for permission." Then he raised a glass of milk, not champagne. A symbolic toast. "Drink this," he said, "and taste what freedom feels like." The applause wasn't polite, it was visceral. The kind that made your chest tighten and your eyes sting. One foreign diplomat stood still, lips pressed tight. He turned to his aide and asked, "Do you realize what this means? If they can scale this, if this isn't a showpiece, our market share in West Africa will collapse." But this wasn't a showpiece. In a small classroom nearby, school children were already receiving free daily milk under a new government nutrition program. And in a refrigerated storage unit behind the main building, shipments were being loaded for delivery. Not to France or the US, but to Mali, Togo, and Niger. Africa was feeding Africa. And at the center of it all stood a man with a red beret and calloused hands. Not a general, not a politician, just a farmer's son, and this was only the beginning. The sun scorched the earth until it cracked. Dust blew in sheets across the open plain, and not even the goats lingered long. It was the kind of land that whispered failure, a place people passed through, never stayed in. But Ibrahim Traoré stood in the center of that barren field, boots planted, arms crossed, eyes steady. Around him, ministers shifted uncomfortably in their tailored suits, shoes dusted red from the soil. One of them finally spoke. "Captain, with respect, this isn't feasible. Not here, not for milk." Another added, "There's no model for this. Even the Dutch haven't done it on dry land like this. No country has." Traoré didn't respond immediately. He stared out at the horizon, where the wind kicked up little ghosts of dust. Then he bent down and picked up a handful of soil, letting it slip through his fingers. They said the same about electricity. They said it about security, about education. But here we are, still standing, he said quietly. And believe me, we will do it again. Laughter echoed from a nearby cluster of villagers watching the discussion. A few leaned on sticks. Others just smirked, arms folded. One called out, "What will the cows even drink, Captain Dust?" More laughter followed. That's when she stepped forward. Salima Dio, tall, shoulders strong from years of hauling water buckets, her face lined not with age, but with stubborn defiance. Her voice carried across the wind like a drumbeat. "Give me cows," she said firmly, "and I swear I'll give you gold." The men turned. Some scoffed. One muttered, "There she goes again, the farmer with big dreams." But Traoré's face didn't change. He nodded at her. "You'll have them," he replied. 3 weeks later, Salima received 12 dairy cows, healthy, local breed, delivered silently by a government truck before sunrise. And within that same week, the first blueprint hit the table. Traoré didn't commission a European firm. He called in 5 young engineers, all university students from Burkina Faso who had studied abroad but chose to return when others had left. They met in a dusty tent, no air conditioning, just one old fan buzzing loudly in the corner. Each rolled out hand-drawn sketches and rough prototypes. "No imported bottling machines," Traoré insisted. "We build our own." "But what about pasteurization?" one student asked. "We'll need a cooling system that can operate in off-grid zones." "We won't rely on the grid," Traoré said. "We build the grid too." A heavy silence followed. Then the youngest engineer, barely 24, adjusted his glasses and said, "There's a Russian model I've studied. It uses vacuum-insulated solar chillers. If we adapt it, there'll be no borrowing." "Design it better, from scratch, right here," Traoré interrupted. That was the birth of the Faso Kosam dairy project. Not in a boardroom, not with investors in suits, but on the ground, where dust turned blue with ink and ambition. And while European dairy companies watched from afar, mocking with press releases about Africa's agricultural illusions, something real was already taking shape under their radar. Within just a month, the first prototype of a milk filtration unit sat humming in the dirt. It used gravity, not electricity, and it worked. But resistance didn't stop. International investors refused to fund it. An economic advisor warned, "We're already under pressure from mining reforms. Don't add milk to the fire." A major West African bank backed out the night before contracts were to be signed. Traoré didn't flinch. He gathered his cabinet in the courtyard of an abandoned military base, now serving as the provisional planning hub. Under the open sky, he laid out the costs. "We cut our budget by 20%. No limousines, no bonuses. This is where it goes. To the people." Salima stood beside him, holding a bucket of fresh milk from just 12 cows. She passed the bucket around. Ministers tasted it. One of them, a longtime skeptic, put the tin cup down and whispered, "It's sweet. Cleaner than imported." "It should be," she said. "It's ours." And so it began. Bricks were laid by teachers who volunteered after school, pipes installed by soldiers, solar panels mounted by students on weekends. There was no ceremony, no ribbon, no media coverage, just work. And blueprints stained with sweat, not signatures. By the end of the 4th month, the foundation of the facility was finished. A small processing unit started operating. Salima named it Room 1. It had no air conditioning, no chrome machinery, but it produced 20 litres a day. And every drop was delivered free of charge to rural clinics where malnourished children waited. That was the turning point. When mothers began to line up outside the plant before sunrise, carrying empty bottles. When village elders sent letters of blessing. When local radio hosts began referring to the project not as Traoré's dairy fantasy, but as our future in a bottle. Still, Europe didn't believe it. They saw no cranes, no steel towers, no import orders. They didn't see the revolution unfolding beneath the dust. But Salima did. She wiped sweat from her forehead, looked at the growing building behind her, and said to a visiting journalist, "They thought milk only came from white factories," she said. Well then, let's show them exactly what brown hands can do. The reporter didn't print it, but Traoré heard it, and the blueprint kept expanding. The morning sun barely broke the horizon when Traoré arrived at the old telecommunications building, now converted into a command center for Burkina Faso's industrial future. He wore his signature red beret and dusty boots. No entourage, no military parade, just a man on a mission. The only thing in his hand was a white folder, thick, worn, stained by months of dust and determination. Inside, the final iteration of the dairy facility's classified blueprint. The room smelled of burnt coffee and ambition. Around a cracked table sat 4 engineers, 2 Russian specialists with grease-stained fingers and 2 young Borinab men who had slept only 3 hours between design sessions. They stood when Traoré entered. He waved for them to sit. "Show me the failure points first," he said plainly. One of the local engineers, Jabari, pulled a schematic from the pile and laid it flat. "If we push this system to cool 10,000 liters a day, we're running at 80% strain on solar. Battery reserves will drop fast during the rainy season." "What's the margin?" Traoré asked. 7 days with cloud cover. After that, we'll need backup." "Diesel?" Traoré inquired. Jabari hesitated. "Yes, but that compromises the green spec." Traoré nodded slowly. "Then we don't do diesel. Improve the reserve." "But that will cost us time, maybe months," Jabari replied. "We're not building for applause," Traoré said firmly. "We're building for grandchildren." Across the room, one of the Russian consultants handed him a single white page. "This is your filtration unit. No electricity, no moving parts. Life expectancy, 20 years. Traoré studied it. The filter's design used pressure chambers and layered sediment. Simpler than expected, brutally effective. "Did you invent this?" he asked. The Russians smiled. "No, your people did. We just helped you believe in it." Before anyone could respond, a knock landed at the steel door. An aide entered, eyes cautious, voice low. "They're here." 3 foreign delegates in grey suits were led in, from an international food conglomerate based in Belgium. They had flown in unannounced, private jet, full security detail, a folder of their own. The older one, a man named Mr. Lormet, placed his branded leather case on the table. "We've been watching your progress," he began, "and frankly, we're quite impressed." Traoré didn't reply. Mr. Lormet opened the case and slid across a polished proposal. "We'd like to invest in 40% of the plant's funding. In exchange, we'll provide machinery, distribution, and processing expertise at 1/10 of your projected cost." One of the younger engineers coughed under his breath. Traoré kept his eyes on the folder. "An ownership?" he asked. "Full European control of production management for the first 8 years, Mr. Lormet said. "Then shared equity. Your nation would still benefit tremendously. Employment, supervision, and leadership would remain European, but local staffing and wages guaranteed." The room went quiet. Traoré looked at the white paper in his hand, the one with the handmade filter, and then at the glossy folder on the table. 2 futures. 2 visions. He stood slowly. "Let me be clear," he said. "You offer speed. Shiny machines. Cheaper numbers. But what you really want is to own our fields, our cows, our milk, and yes, even our pride." Mr. Lormet chuckled, confused. "Captain, this is standard. We bring the world's best systems. You benefit. Your people benefit." Traoré stepped forward, voice even, but sharp. "You think we don't know how this works? You lease us efficiency and call it progress, but we pay for it with our dignity." He leaned closer, eyes locked. "I won't lease my country's pride for efficiency," he said with quiet finality. The silence was thick. One of the Belgian delegates spoke up. "With respect, this plant simply won't be viable without global partnerships." Traoré raised the white page. "We have our partnership," he replied. "It's right here, between our hands and our land." The delegates stood. One adjusted his tie. "Then we wish you luck. You'll need it." As they left, Jabari exhaled. "Captain, that was billions of dollars in savings. Just gone. No, Traoré said calmly. It was billions in chains cut. Later that evening, Traoré returned to the field site. Salima was there, guiding the workers pouring concrete. She saw the paper in his hand and asked, "Bad news?" "No," he said. "They offered us help. We declined." She smiled. "Good. I don't trust people who smile when they say partnership." He laughed softly and handed her the page. "You'll need this. It's your filter." Salima stared at the diagram. "I don't understand half of this." "You will," he said. "And then you'll teach the next girl so she never has to ask anyone else for permission." The red hat, the white paper, that was the real contract. And it was signed with something stronger than ink: conviction. The morning they arrived, no one noticed. No red carpet, no media flash. Just a quiet convoy of dusty buses rolling in before sunrise, windows fogged by breath and determination. Inside were 34 young African engineers, some from Ouagadougou, others from Accra, Bamako, and Dar es Salaam. Most of them had spent years in Russia, Cuba, and India, training in renewable energy, agricultural robotics, and fluid dynamics. Their return was not marked by ceremony, only silence. As the buses stopped at the site, a woman stepped off first. Her name was Asha. Her notebook was covered in hand-drawn schematics. She looked out over the plain of dry earth and crumbling rock and said, "This is where it begins." Minutes later, the first shovel broke the soil, not for gold, not for oil, but for milk. No international reporters covered it. They had already dismissed the site as a failed experiment. No Western investors visited. They had already decided the numbers didn't add up. But as those shovels dug deep, as wireframes went up, and solar panels were hauled on bare shoulders, a storm was quietly gathering. What do you think of Traoré's bold stand against foreign control? Comment Amen if you support his vision for African self-reliance. In Brussels, the CEO of a major European dairy conglomerate sat before a boardroom full of analysts. A leaked photo of the Burkina Faso site was projected on the wall, a blurry image of engineers in mismatched uniforms and second-hand boots. He laughed. "Do they even know how pasteurization works?" he asked. The room joined him in smug amusement. But back in Burkina Faso, something very different was happening. Asha and her team didn't waste time. The central facility was divided into 4 functional zones: filtration, pasteurization, fermentation, and bottling. Each was designed with absolute precision for minimal energy consumption and local material sourcing. Not one part relied on imported chemical coolants or diesel-powered compressors. Instead, they tapped solar aquifers and ceramic thermal exchangers. Tech developed quietly in student labs while the world looked elsewhere. They weren't just building a dairy plant. They were designing a model that could survive on its own terms, even if the world turned its back. Jabari, one of the lead local engineers, rewired the core cooling system overnight after realizing European models couldn't sustain performance above 38 degrees Celsius. "You build for Europe, you get European failure," he muttered under his breath. "But we build for Burkina." Each unit passed through 6 hands before approval. Every single engineer rotated shifts, as builders, welders, even electricians. They worked by lantern light, often barefoot, always pushing beyond what they were told was possible. There were no press releases, only progress. A week into the build, a delegation from a West African trade bloc arrived unannounced. Expecting to see a failed prototype, they instead found a skeleton of steel rising in the dust, humming with motion. One official blinked in disbelief. "Who's managing this?" "Us," Asha said simply. "No foreign supervisors, only the cows are imported." They didn't stay long. In the capital, whispers started to spread. Ministers who once called the project a fantasy began sending aides to observe the site. Industry insiders requested updates, but Traoré kept them out. This wasn't a show, it was a foundation. Meanwhile, the team built a water cooling chamber lined with bamboo panels and bioresin, something they had developed during a competition in Belarus 2 years earlier. It kept the internal chambers within optimal temperature, without using a single watt of grid power. At evening meals, the engineers sat together on crates, eating rice and beans with their hands, drawing out blueprints on napkins, making notes in the dirt. One night, Asha looked around the circle and said, They thought we were just the help, but actually we are the architects. There was no applause, just knowing nods. That same week, a foreign reporter stationed in West Africa finally visited the site. She snapped photos, took notes, and later filed a short, dismissive column. Burkina Faso's dream dairy plant lacks international oversight. She quoted an anonymous Western dairy consultant who warned, "Without proper training, even the best machines will rot." She didn't realize there were no foreign machines. They built everything. And by the end of that month, as trucks began to arrive carrying raw milk from Salima's village, the engineers didn't stop to celebrate. They simply opened their notebooks and began designing the pasteurization chamber's next upgrade. The revolution wasn't televised. It was hand-welded, line by line, bolt by bolt, dream by dream. And it had only just begun. The first convoy of cattle edged onto the site at dawn. Hooves clicking on plywood ramps, steam rising from their hides into the cool air. Workers paused mid-hammer, watching as veterinarians guided each animal towards shaded paddocks lined with fresh straw. Traoré stood near the gate with Salima, counting softly. 12, 20, 30. Every cow carried a ribbon of bright cloth around its neck. A promise that it would never be treated as a disposable asset. Critics had predicted a circus. They got discipline instead. Each animal was scanned, vaccinated, and brushed before touching Burkina Bay soil. Traoré insisted on imported mineral blocks, filtered water, and solar-powered fans to push away insects. A senior budget officer grumbled, "Machines first, Captain, cattle later." "Steel does not moo if we run late," Traoré replied. "Steel will not bleed for us either. These cows, these are the living engines of the factory. Engines must be cared for." Word spread quickly in Ouagadougou. An economist mocked the project on morning radio. "Royal treatment for cows while children go hungry," he said, ignoring that the milk was meant for those very children. At the construction site, the laughter carried no weight. The cows chewed calmly, tails flicking, as the engineers resumed welding the pasteurization hall's frame. By midday, the temperature climbed. Instead of driving the herd into shelters, Traoré ordered a pause in all machine work. Crews erected a lattice of bamboo screens over the paddocks, then hoisted reflective tarps stitched together from old grain sacks. The shade dropped the ground temperature by 10 degrees Celsius. A younger engineer, Fadil, wiped sweat from his brow. "We just halted $1 million build for animals," he murmured. Asher answered without looking up from her tablet. "If the herd fails, the plant fails. This is the blueprint." That afternoon, schoolchildren from a nearby village arrived with their teacher to see what progress actually looked like. One boy named Tierno, no more than 8, peered curiously over the fence. A gentle-eyed cow nudged forward and Salima beckoned him inside. Under a roof of solar panels that doubled as a lighting array, the boy balanced a small wooden stool. Salima gently guided his hands. Warm milk streamed into a tin pail, glowing gold beneath the LED lights. The scene froze time itself. A child, a cow, and technology working together, in quiet harmony. A Reuters stringer happened to witness the moment but dismissed it as sentimental fluff, unsuitable for global finance pages. He focused instead on the half-built tower cranes and the absence of European brand logos. His headline later that night would read, "Burkina Faso dairy plant lacks modern equipment." He never mentioned Tierno, or the taste of fresh milk that made the boy's eyes widen in awe. As dusk settled, generators clicked off, and the site shifted to battery storage. The low hum of insect life filled the gaps between distant weld sparks. Traoré walked the perimeter with Musa the herder, inspecting every waterline. Musa traced a finger along a copper pipe. "You could have chosen plastic. Cheaper," he said. "Plastic grows brittle," Traoré replied. "I want these pipes alive when I am old." Inside the temporary control trailer, spreadsheets glowed on recycled monitors. The finance team projected rising costs. Veterinary supplies, fodder, cultivation, staff training. An advisor warned of overruns, his voice thin. "We will be 10% above budget if we continue this animal-first policy." Traoré circled the figure with a blunt pencil. "Write it down as investment, not loss," he said. Milk lasts a day. Trust lasts generations. Beyond the trailer, the new herd lay in soft straw, bellies full, breathing slowly beneath fans powered by the same sun that had baked the earth a month earlier. Tierno's stool remained where he had left it, a small emblem of what dignity looked like when granted to those who needed it most. That night, critics on social media posted drone photos of the unfinished plant, mocking the sparse machinery and proud cows. European commentators joked, perhaps they will teach the animals to operate the valves. On the site, Asha sat under a lantern adjusting sensor calibrations. She read the comment, smiled to herself, and whispered to no one, "Let them laugh now." In the capital, a team of international analysts began drafting a comprehensive assessment of the project's viability. Their conclusions were almost ready, typed in confident phrases, backed by colorful graphs that showed inevitable failure. They did not include a single line about copper pipes or shaded paddocks or a boy learning to milk under solar light. They would publish in 7 days. By then, the first leaders from the royal herd would roll into cold storage, ready to face every doubt. Head on. The cows slept. The machines waited. The future moved quietly through the night, alive and breathing. It started with one report, an 89-page analysis issued discreetly by the Institute for Global Agricultural Investment. Released on a Sunday, buried between news of a European summit and a celebrity scandal, it should have gone unnoticed. But by Monday morning, the headlines had already taken shape. Burkina's dairy gamble destined to fail, and Traoré's fantasy, a $2 billion sinkhole. The report didn't bother with photos or interviews. It leaned on algorithms, charts, and abstract terms. Unfavorable yield zones, volatile currency risks, inadequate technological oversight. There were no quotes from workers, no mention of Salima, no footage of the herd, or of Tierno milking under solar light. Just a chorus of Western metrics declaring the entire operation unsustainable. Within 48 hours, 3 international investment groups froze their funding pledges. A fourth quietly withdrew. A financial advisor in Dar es Salaam warned that any further association with the project would be economically suicidal. Western media picked up the story and ran with it, like wolves on blood. CNN Africa aired a segment titled "Overbuilt, Underplanned," showing slow-motion shots of unfinished construction and cows grazing idly. The anchor smirked while saying, "Many see this as a classic case of ambition outpacing infrastructure." Even Al Jazeera published an editorial stating, "Traoré's vision lacks the logistical scaffolding of success." At the construction site, the shift supervisor read the article aloud over lunch. Workers went quiet. Jabari, the lead engineer, folded the paper and dropped it into a bucket of wet cement. Inside the operations trailer, Traoré gathered his core team. No one spoke. The room felt heavier than ever before. "We expected pushback," he said calmly, scanning their tired faces. "But we didn't expect the retreat of those who claim to believe in us." Zaina crossed her arms. "They didn't believe. They gambled. And now that it looks hard, they fold." Traoré nodded. "Then we don't fold." But reality pressed hard. Deliveries slowed. A critical shipment of lab-grade tubing was halted at customs, under the claim of missing regulatory clearance. A European logistics firm cancelled its contract without explanation. The financial reserves were thinning fast. Then came the whispers in the capital. He overreached. It was ego, not economics. He's playing farmer while the country bleeds. Salima heard it all. From the radio in her truck as she drove milk samples back to the site. That evening, she pulled off the road, stood on a rusted barrel, and stared across her village. Then she shouted, "We meet tonight. Bring every chair, every lantern, every woman who owns a cow." They came in sandals, in wrappers, with babies tied to their backs and fists clenched. Farmers, teachers, tailors. Even a retired midwife who hadn't left her house in 2 years. Salima stood beneath a tree and spoke without notes. "They say we don't know what we're doing. They say our cows are lazy, our land too dry, our dreams not worth betting on. Well, they've made their choice, she said, pointing to the ground. This is ours, and if they won't invest, we will. Someone shouted, "With what money?" Salima raised a jar filled with coins. Start here. Every woman who sells milk, every man who owns a goat, every youth with a phone to spread the truth. We do not wait for permission to be powerful. A slow murmur turned into applause. Then applause turned into a chant. Kosam, Kosam, Kosam. Milk. The next morning, Traoré stood on the construction platform, watching dozens of villagers arrive with jars, baskets, and boxes. Some held bills, others brought produce to feed workers, all of it stamped with intention. A child handed him a folded note. We believe in you more than they fear you. Traoré passed it to Jabari. Frame that, he said. It's worth more than the report. That same afternoon, an old man in rags approached the gate. He asked for Salima. When she came, he placed a single egg into her palm. My hen laid it this morning, he said quietly. I thought, let it build something big and important. She swallowed hard and nodded. It will, she said. Meanwhile, the analysts who wrote the report were being celebrated in European business circles. They were invited to roundtables, offered consulting gigs, praised for their so-called brutal honesty. But on the ground in Burkina Faso, something moved. It wasn't in spreadsheets. It was in footsteps, in hands, in sweat, and the cement kept drying. When the first 100 cows arrived, there were cheers. Not the kind of cheers made for cameras, but deep, throaty, ancestral sounds. The kind of joy that comes from reclaiming something that was never supposed to be yours again. The cows stepped off the trucks, slowly adjusting to the dry wind and the open plains, their eyes scanning for something unfamiliar. Yet there were no gates, no barbed wire, no electric fences. A journalist from Abidjan, who came to cover the moment, asked, where will they actually be kept? Salima, standing beside a young girl holding a milking bucket, answered plainly, they'll stay, because this place right here, it's home. The reporter raised an eyebrow. You trust cows with no boundaries at all? Traoré arrived just in time to hear the question. He smiled. We trust the people around them. That's the difference that truly matters. The cows roamed freely that day. Pastures spread across 40 acres of land. Land that had once been declared useless terrain by foreign consultants. Instead of fences, the site had been designed with naturally embedded border markers, rows of native trees, shallow irrigation ditches, and shaded resting areas that drew the animals inward, instead of boxing them in. It was a revolutionary approach, especially in a region where decades of imported farming practices had taught that security was steel, control was electrified, and productivity came from restriction. But here, control meant something else. Freedom with responsibility. Soon, word reached Brussels. At an agricultural expo, a Belgian lobbyist stood on stage, scoffing as images of the Burkina dairy project flashed behind him. They're calling it innovation, he said, voice full of irony. I call it chaos. No system, no structure, no fencing, just cows and a whole lot of hope. The room chuckled. But back in Burkina Faso, things were unfolding differently. Asha monitored herd movement with solar-powered trackers, made by local engineering students. Each cow wore a tag with embedded sensors that fed data to a dashboard on her tablet, tracking hydration, distance traveled, even stress levels. The cows naturally gravitated toward water and shade, eliminating the need for force or fear. The pasture was designed with care, not confinement. We don't cage what we truly respect, Jabari said one evening as he watched the cows settle under a moonlit sky. They know they're safe, and that's enough for them. Skepticism remained. A European development official sent a private message to the Ministry of Agriculture, warning of biosecurity risks and livestock unpredictability. One line read, free-roaming animals reduce both safety and efficiency. A containment strategy is absolutely essential. Traoré read it, then deleted it without a word. Instead, he walked barefoot through the pasture the next morning, flanked by village elders. One of them, a man named Karamo, touched the earth and said, "This land, it remembers when we walked with cattle, before the chains, before the gates. You brought that back to us." Traoré replied, "I didn't bring it. I just stopped blocking it." Then came a test. One afternoon, a motorbike backfired on the road near the pasture. The loud pop startled several cows. One took off sprinting toward the field's edge. Workers panicked. But the cow stopped at the tree line, then turned back. It looked around, snorted softly, and returned to the herd. Asha, who had witnessed it all, smiled. "It works. It really works," she whispered. Even Salima, a woman not easily impressed, said, "They know where home is now. That means everything." As the dairy project moved forward, stories of the farm without fences began to spread across the Sahel. Young farmers from Niger came to observe. Delegates from Senegal requested a tour. Even a quiet inquiry came from a South American cooperative, curious about the method. And still, no fences were built. One evening, a boy no older than 10 sat beside his grandfather outside the cow shelter. He asked, "Grandpa, are you scared they'll run away or get lost?" The old man chuckled. "When something is yours, truly yours, it doesn't run. It roots, it stays." That same night, an investor from the Middle East visited unannounced. He toured the pasture silently, expecting to find disorder. Instead, he saw calm. Children nearby were collecting water without fear. He turned to Traoré and said, "This doesn't look like any dairy plant I've ever seen before." "It's not," Traoré replied. "It's a promise, not a plant." The investor didn't invest, but he left with respect. And the next morning, as the sun crept over the horizon, a child once again knelt under a cow and filled her tin cup with fresh milk. No wire, no fence. No fear. Just trust. And that, in Burkina Faso, was enough. It was just past midnight when the ship docked. No horns, no ceremony, just a slow, deliberate groan as the vessel edged into the port of Lomé under the cloak of darkness. The crew moved with precision, offloading crates that hummed faintly, glowing faint blue under the sealed container wraps. Each box was stamped with 4 words in bold black font: BF Dairy Sovereignty. No company name, no barcode, no European oversight. The dock workers, mostly young Togolese men, stared at the unusual markings, whispering to each other in awe. Inside those crates were the final components of Burkina Faso's dairy revolution. Custom filtration chambers, solar-integrated pasteurizers, ceramic chill coils, all engineered by a joint African-Russian development team in a lab outside St. Petersburg. Burkina Faso had refused all Western supply chains. It had paid in raw materials, agricultural patents, and sovereign barter agreements. The result was a shipment invisible to Europe. Until now. At 3:17 a.m., a convoy of 12 unmarked trucks began loading the crates under tight security. Traoré had sent only locals for the job. No uniforms, no flags, no noise. He knew this part of the process was more vulnerable than all the rest. But by 4:02 a.m., an official from Ecoways Customs, educated in Paris and stationed under French influence, stepped onto the loading dock with a clipboard and a smug expression. "Stop the transfer immediately," he ordered. The workers froze. One of them asked, "On what grounds exactly?" The official waved a paper in the air. "We've been informed there may be unregistered technologies inside these crates. We need to inspect immediately." A call was made, not to Traoré, not to the Burkinabe government, but to Asha, who was already wide awake in Ouagadougou, reviewing intake schematics. She listened without emotion, then said 2 words: "Seal everything." Back at the port, the men began tightening the steel locks on the remaining crates. The customs officer stepped forward, indignant. "You don't have the right. This is international law." One worker, an older man named Tando, looked the officer square in the eye and replied, "Then write new laws, because these don't belong to you." By dawn, 8 of the 12 trucks had already left, weaving inland toward Burkina Faso across lesser-known trade routes, coordinated with military protection. The remaining 4 sat silent, their drivers leaning against their doors, refusing to open a single latch. By noon, word of the standoff reached European newsrooms. Reuters published a piece titled, "Burkina's secret dairy shipment raises legal concerns." The Guardian ran with, "Is Russia arming Africa's agriculture?" As if milk machines and pasteurizers were weapons. A Western analyst interviewed on television said, "It's deeply troubling to see African states bypass traditional trade partners in this way. These unsupervised technologies pose risks, not just to safety, but to influence. Influence, that was the real issue." At the presidential office in Ouagadougou, Traoré stood before a chalkboard. No cameras, no press. On it were 3 routes, drawn in coloured chalk, each marked with a different backup plan. He turned to his team. "They tried to stop the cows," he said. "Then the land, then the science. Now they're trying to stop the steel." Jabari grinned. "But the steel already moved, Captain. It's long gone." Salima arrived an hour later with a crate key in hand. "One of your machines just made it to our field," she said. "It's still warm. Want to come and see?" Traoré didn't answer. He simply walked outside and looked up at the sky. It wasn't cloudy, but the storm had arrived. That evening, the last 4 trucks were released from the port. After a surprise announcement from Togo's Minister of Transport, no country will be penalized for building its own dignity. It was the first public break from the expected line, and it sent shockwaves across the continent. Inside the first crate delivered to the dairy plant was a handwritten note taped to the machine, "To our African partners." No fences, no masters, just builders. The pasteurization unit powered on, using only 22% of the expected energy load. Zaina stood beside it, tears silently running down her face. Jabari touched the unit's side and whispered, "They don't get it. We didn't import technology, we imported faith in ourselves." And for the first time, the hum of machinery joined the sound of cows, not to replace them, but to honor them. Steel had arrived, and it came without permission. Salima stood barefoot on the polished floor of the processing unit, staring down at the first chilled bottle of milk. The label read Faso Kosam in bold green letters. It had taken 1 year, 2 rainy seasons, 3 currency shocks, and more skepticism than she could count. But now, it was real. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She opened the bottle, poured a small amount into a glass, and drank. Smooth, creamy, clean. She handed the rest to Tierno, one of the teen apprentices from her village. "Take it to the lab," she said. "Let's see if the cow agrees, shall we?" By evening, Burkina Faso's central lab completed its first batch of quality control analysis. The results came back flawless. Bacteria levels, negligible. Nutrient content, exceeding most West African milk brands. 0 additives. 0 preservatives. Jabari reviewed the report and raised his eyebrows. "We just made the cleanest milk on the continent," he said with quiet wonder. The team celebrated, but quietly. They knew what came next. 2 days later, the first shipment was packed and sent to regional clinics and schools. Children in Kodogu, Kaya, and Bobo de Lasso received their first bottles. Free. No powdered formulas, no foreign logos, just milk. From their land for their bodies. But the celebration didn't last. 3 weeks into production, an unexpected email arrived at the Ministry of Health. The subject line read, "Urgent Health Risk Advisory. Dairy imports from Burkina Faso." It was from a private German laboratory commissioned by a European dairy conglomerate. The message claimed that Fossum samples had high turbidity levels and were below European health standards for pasteurized dairy. The report warned of potential risks if consumed without European-grade verification. The media ran with it instantly. French news outlets published Burkinabe milk under scrutiny. German tabloids screamed unregulated dairy floods Sahel markets. A US business magazine wrote, "Can West Africa handle high-tech milk?" The blow was fast and deliberate. Salima received the news while unloading crates in a rural village. A nurse showed her the article on a phone screen. "Is it true?" she asked. Salima stared at it. "No," she said slowly, "but they say it's dangerous now, don't they?" Salima placed a bottle into the nurse's hand. "Then drink with me right here, or don't speak again." Back at the plant, Traoré gathered his inner circle. The room felt colder than usual. "They're coming after the symbol," Asha said. "They couldn't stop the cows, couldn't stop the steel, so now they attack the milk." "They're afraid of belief," Jabari added. "If this milk is clean, then the system that made it is clean. And that breaks their whole model." Traoré nodded. "So let's break it wide open." Within 24 hours, Burkina Faso's own national lab released a comprehensive peer-reviewed analysis. Signed by 3 international African experts and 1 neutral observer from the World Food Programme. It didn't just refute the German claim, it obliterated it. According to the findings, Faso Kosam's milk had 18% fewer trace toxins than comparable European supermarket brands. The cooling method, developed by the local engineers, preserved natural probiotic structures better than conventional pasteurization. The filtration system, made from ceramic and local clay, exceeded the bacterial filtration threshold established by WH dairy standards. The final line of the report read, "Milk this clean does not require permission to be believed." A press conference was held in the capital, no suits, no flags, just Salima standing with her arms folded behind a table stacked with fresh bottles. "I've raised cows for 30 years, she said firmly. "I've raised children too. You think I'd feed them poison?" Reporters went quiet. A Western journalist dared to ask, "Then why do European labs say it's not clean milk?" Salima stepped forward, eyes fixed. "Because we made it. Not them. That's the only reason." The room broke into applause. Traoré issued one short statement to the press. "We will no longer submit our dignity to labs built on colonial standards. We measure ourselves with our own tools now." The following day, schools across Burkina Faso announced mandatory milk programs with Faso Kosam. Mothers lined up to volunteer at distribution points. Nurses at regional clinics began recording signs of improved nutrition among children, within just 2 weeks of daily consumption. Meanwhile, the European conglomerate that funded the German report tried to backpedal, but it was too late. Social media across Africa lit up with a new hashtag. #Milk without chains. And on a small hill near the dairy plant, a boy sat in the grass, sipping from a bottle with a cow on the label. His sister watched him, then asked, "Does it taste good to you?" He nodded. "Tastes like we did it ourselves, for real." The lights in the National Broadcast Studio were hot. A camera crew stood poised, microphones tested. The air was tight with tension. Not because of politics or war, but because of a single glass of milk. On the center table stood a chilled bottle of Faso Kosam, freshly delivered from the plant. Its label gleamed under the lights, simple and bold. Next to it, one clear glass waited, already half full. At precisely 7 SARS p.m., the broadcast went live. Traoré entered quietly, not in uniform but in a faded cotton shirt and old boots. No speeches prepared, no national anthem. He took his seat across from a local journalist, whose hands trembled just slightly beneath the desk. He looked into the camera. No cue cards, no teleprompter. "This," he said, lifting the glass, "is not a gesture. Not some symbol." He paused. "This isn't just a beverage. It's proof that we built something with our hands, our effort, and our will." And then, in front of millions watching across the nation and likely dozens of embassies abroad, he drank. The studio fell silent. No applause, no music, just one swallow. He set the glass down gently, then looked at the camera again. "There are those who say we cannot feed ourselves, that dignity must be imported, that nourishment must arrive in powdered packets stamped with foreign logos. Let this end that story, right here, right now." Within minutes, the moment had gone viral. Footage spread across Burkina Faso in seconds. Cafes replayed it on loop. Elderly women in villages wiped their eyes as they watched from small televisions. Children raised their own bottles and copied the gesture. Social media exploded. But so did the backlash. Within the hour, critics in Paris called it a publicity stunt. European agricultural firms released statements warning of unverified safety protocols. A cable news commentator in Washington smirked, "You can't drink your way to credibility, not in this world." In the capital, opposition politicians released a joint letter, declaring the event shameless self-celebration and evidence of dangerous populism. One international journalist tweeted, "One glass doesn't make a system. Borsina's plant still hasn't passed EU certification. This isn't proof, it's performance theatre." But in Ouagadougou's public square, hundreds had gathered around the central projection screen to witness the broadcast. After the glass was emptied, no one moved for several seconds. Then a woman stepped forward, held up her own bottle of Faso Kosam and drank. No speech, just solidarity. And then another followed, and another, until the crowd was drinking together, silent and proud. In a school outside Fodnagorma, a teacher, Mr. Banyo, paused the lesson to show her students the clip. After watching, she turned off the screen and said, "You don't clap for a man drinking milk. You clap for the nation that made it possible, the people who made it real." Do you believe Traoré has sparked a new kind of revolution in Africa? Comment Amen if you support his fearless leadership and vision for self-reliance. That evening, the state channel re-aired the broadcast twice. Not with edits, not with music, just the moment. One glass, one nation. At the factory, Salima walked into the chilling room and looked at the crates now stacked to the ceiling. "Ready to move?" Jabari asked. She nodded. "They're not waiting anymore. They want it. They believe in it." He handed her a list. 3 new regions just requested weekly supply, and the army wants daily delivery for their school feeding programs. She smiled. "That's the first war I'll gladly fight." Meanwhile, in a foreign embassy in the capital, diplomats watched the footage in silence. One of them leaned back in his chair and said, "He just declared independence with a glass of milk." And he had. Later that night, when the cameras were off and the lights shut down, Traoré sat alone in his office, a half-empty bottle of Faso Kosam on the desk beside him. He stared out the window, watching the stars over the city that once couldn't feed itself. He whispered, "We didn't just make milk, we made memory." And somewhere in a village, a mother tucked her child into bed, kissed their forehead and said, "You drink this now. You sleep strong. This came from us." The bottle stayed cold, and the future warm. The runway at Ouagadougou International hadn't seen this much foreign traffic in years. That morning, 3 private jets landed one after another, each carrying executives in pressed suits, polished shoes, and briefcases worth more than most villagers earned in a year. They came with handshakes ready and contracts already printed. They came from Paris, Geneva, Brussels, and Berlin. They came because a single glass of milk had shaken global confidence. Faso Kosam's success had become a market threat. The test results had gone global. African consumers were asking new questions. Who really owned their food? Why were they drinking powdered milk from Europe, when Borsina's was cleaner, fresher, and cheaper? At the dairy plant, Traoré prepared for their arrival. Without ceremony, no red carpet, no air-conditioned conference rooms, no translators. Traoré would walk them through what they came to see, nothing more. The first delegation was from a major French dairy giant. Their regional director, a thin man with a smooth voice and silver cufflinks, stepped off the plane with the confidence of someone used to being welcomed. He smiled wide. "We're here to help you scale global distribution, top-tier packaging, EU export certification," he said. "We want to bring Faso Kosam to the world stage." Behind him, a Swiss banker added, "But to do that, we'd need to restructure the ownership model. A controlling interest, just to protect international compliance, of course." The Belgian firm offered a number, one that would have paid for 2 more factories, 3 highways, and 5 years of military salaries. Traoré said nothing. He nodded politely and motioned toward the waiting transport. No military escort, just a dusty flatbed truck with benches in the back. The men hesitated, glanced at one another, then climbed aboard. The ride was bumpy, fast, and silent. When they arrived at the plant, the first thing they saw was the cooling tower, covered in vines, humming with solar energy. No fences. Children played nearby. Cows grazed lazily behind a mud wall painted with folk art. They expected chrome and steel. They found clay and sunlight. Inside, the pasteurization chamber was quiet and clean. Asha greeted them in overalls, sweat on her brow, tablet in hand. She pointed to the filtration unit and said, 98% effective, runs on local materials, zero electricity needed. Would you like a test sample? The French director smiled again. No need, we trust the process, but let's talk about expanding, shall we? Still, Traoré said nothing. The bottling section was next. Young engineers packed crates with care. No conveyor belts, no robots, just hands and discipline. The Swiss banker pulled out a sheet. Our analysts believe we can automate this section and boost throughput by 300%. All we ask is a 51% equity stake to start. Then you keep the brand. It'll remain Fasgate, he said, then looked at the man. Still, nothing. Outside, the group was led to a shaded pavilion where local workers were eating lunch. Millet cakes, boiled yam, and cups of milk. One child ran past with a bottle of Faso Kosam, tripping slightly and laughing. No security stopped him. No one yelled. The Belgian representative leaned over. Captain, you could be rich. Personally, you sign these papers and Europe opens every door you can imagine. Traoré finally spoke. I didn't build doors. I built walls, wide enough for all of us to walk through. The men blinked. He continued. You see labor, I see ownership. You see markets, I see mouths fed. You want equity. But we've already invested our lives. What you offer can buy machines, not memory. The Frenchman cleared his throat. But surely we can come to some kind of agreement, some kind of partnership, maybe? Traoré handed him a chilled bottle. Here's your partnership. No signature, no contract, just milk. Back in Paris, the mood shifted. The investors returned with nothing. No photos, no licenses, no leverage. They couldn't explain it. The operation worked, but refused capital. The market was hungry, but wouldn't sell. A leaked memo from the European Agricultural Board later revealed their concern. Burkina Faso's model poses a structural threat to current market hierarchies. If replicated, it may trigger a sovereignty trend in African agris. That was the moment Paris froze. Not because of war, but because a nation had quietly said no and kept walking with one bottle. And no need to explain. The letter came in a white envelope with gold trim, delivered by a private courier who wore sunglasses and didn't say a word. Salima was in the barn, wrist deep in a pail of water, when her son handed her the envelope. She dried her hands on her wrap, opened it, and read. Her brow didn't move. It was a formal offer. $30 million for the land. Not just the portion under the dairy project, but all of it. Her grazing fields, her family's well, the mango trees her father planted before she was born. The sender was a multinational agris group based in Luxembourg, backed by a coalition of European investors. The letter praised her contributions to national development, cited their intent to build upon her legacy, and promised to elevate the facility to global compliance and production standards. All they needed was her land. That evening, the family gathered in her courtyard. The paper lay in the center of the table like a coiled snake. Her brother couldn't sit still. That's more than we'd ever make in 10 lifetimes, he said, pacing. Do you understand what this could actually do for us? For our children's future? You could retire, Salima, her eldest daughter added. Never work another day. You could finally rest. You could build a hospital in the village, a real one. Doctors, clean water, not just dreams anymore. Even her mother, who rarely spoke above a whisper, leaned forward. It's just land, child. Land gets tired. But money feeds the tired ones. Salima said nothing. She stood up, walked to the edge of the field where the cows had bedded down, and looked out. The moon was bright enough to see the furrows in the ground, the footprints of children who had come for milk that morning, the shadows of trees that had outlived kings. She came back to the table and spoke softly. You don't sell land watered by your ancestors' milk. Her brother slammed the table. That's poetry, not policy. You're not thinking straight right now. She looked him in the eye. I'm thinking straighter than I ever have in my life. That paper isn't a gift. It's a grave, a pretty one. The next day, the courier returned, waiting outside the gate. She walked past him with a folded letter in her hand. "Take this back," she said. "Tell them the answer is no." The man didn't move. "There will be another offer. Higher?" "I don't need a higher number," she said. "I already know my worth, and that's enough." Within hours, the refusal made it to the press. The headline read, "Burkina Faso farmer declines 30 molars. Land deal cites ancestral honor." European outlets treated it like folklore. African media called it bravery. But within her own family, silence stretched. Her brother didn't speak to her for 3 days. Her daughter cried. Even the village imam visited to gently ask if she'd reconsider. She didn't. Instead, she walked through the village, explaining her decision to every woman who had ever brought a cow to her pasture. She spoke at the school, the clinic, the market. "I'm not keeping the land for me," she said. "I'm keeping it for us. Because once you sell it, you don't just lose the ground, you lose the story written into it." Meanwhile, the company doubled its offer. 60 million, a private meeting, a seat on the board, a lifetime annuity. Salima didn't respond. Traoré visited her that week. He didn't try to persuade her either way. He simply sat with her on a bench, both of them staring at the horizon. "They'll never understand, you know," he said. "They don't have to," she replied. "They just have to leave." He nodded. "We're not fighting to win, we're fighting to remember who we are." The next morning, a new sign was planted at the front of the field. It wasn't fancy, just carved wood painted by hand. No milk for sale, no land for sale, just honor, poured daily. It didn't stop the calls, it didn't stop the offers, but it stopped the silence. Mothers began bringing their daughters to Salima's field, not just to learn milking, but to learn how to say no. Young girls watched her hands, but listened to her words. "You don't wait to be valuable," she said. "You decide right now." And somewhere in a boardroom in Europe, a frustrated executive scribbled one note across the final rejection letter. "The land won't move, and neither will she." The first shipment crossed the border at dawn. 6 trucks, each painted in white and green, their sides marked with bold lettering, Faso Kosam, from our land to yours. Inside were thousands of milk cartons, packed with solar-cooled precision, driven by young Burkinabe mechanics trained through the new National Logistics Program. The destination, Bamako, Mali. By noon, children in schoolyards across Mali were drinking Faso Kosam for the first time. Cartons were handed out alongside dry bread and rice. Each bore a message printed in 3 languages. Proudly made in Burkina Faso, nourishment from the Sahel. The reaction was immediate. Surprise at the taste, excitement at the packaging, disbelief that it wasn't from Europe. News cameras captured the moment. A Malian boy held up his carton and asked, "Why haven't we always had this before?" Within 48 hours, distribution requests came from Senegal, Togo, and Niger. The Foreign Ministry set up a dedicated team just to handle export coordination. Faso Kosam had become more than a milk brand. It was now a regional movement, a symbol of self-reliance, clean agriculture, and Africa feeding itself. But the celebration didn't last long before the storm began. In Brussels, a coalition of European dairy producers issued a joint statement condemning Faso Kosam's expansion. They called it a threat to existing economic partnerships, accusing the Burkinabe government of unfair trade practices, excessive subsidies, and deviation from standard dairy norms. In reality, it was none of those things. What frightened them wasn't the milk, it was the model. Burkina Faso had created a product cleaner than theirs, cheaper, without cutting wages, and beloved without advertising budgets. And they had done it without a single euro of European oversight. Suddenly, tariffs were floated, border regulations were reviewed, health concerns were raised again, recycled from old failed smear campaigns. European retailers in Africa began pulling Fossum cartons from select stores citing supply inconsistencies. Behind the scenes, polite but firm phone calls were made, urging Mali and Senegal to reconsider dependency on untested suppliers. But the consumers weren't listening. In Bamako, stores ran out of stock within a week. In Lomé, parents waited in line to buy boxes for their children. A woman was quoted saying plainly, "I never thought I'd trust anything more than powdered milk from France. Then I tasted this." Traoré stood in the distribution center, watching crates being stamped, sealed, and loaded for a second wave of orders. Asha walked up with a printout in hand. "Demand is now outpacing production," she said. "We'll need to double capacity within 6 months." He didn't flinch. "Then we do," Jabari added quietly. "The EU is preparing a case against us at the WTO. They want to frame this as destabilizing act." Traoré looked at them both. "Feeding your neighbors is not destabilization. It's justice." The government responded to threats by publishing every test, every audit, and every logistical blueprint online. Nothing to hide. Everything to share. They invited independent labs from Ghana, Rwanda, and Kenya to verify their standards. Every lab returned with the same conclusion: superior quality, transparent practices, and local control. But the pressure kept growing. A French trade official warned in a private memo, "If this continues, European dairy influence across West Africa will collapse in less than 5 years." Back on the ground, no one cared. In the streets of Dakar, graffiti appeared overnight, spray painted onto alley walls and bus stops. "My milk has a name, Faso Kosam." Salima visited one of the partner farms in Mali and stood quietly as workers unpacked cartons and checked expiration dates. One teenage girl looked up and said softly, "You made this?" Salima smiled and replied, "No, we did." Later that day, the girl was filmed pouring a carton into her little brother's cup. She looked into the camera and said, "I don't want foreign food anymore. I want food that knows my name." The clip went viral across the continent. At the United Nations Trade Summit 2 weeks later, when a European delegate accused Burkina Faso of regional disruption, Traoré responded in a calm voice, "The only thing we disrupted was hunger." Then he opened a carton, raised it to the assembly, and took a sip. No applause followed, but everyone watched. And in villages and cities alike, across borders once drawn by colonial hands, children kept drinking, families kept buying, nations kept asking. Because for the first time in a long time, Africa was being fed by Africa. And that was irreversible. For months, no one saw it coming. The dairy plant was visible, the trucks were visible, the milk cartons were on shelves. But what kept it all running? The real reason Faso Kosam could deliver fresh milk across 5 nations without a single ice truck was buried 3 feet underground. A cold chain, but not the kind the world knew. This one was solar-powered, gravity-assisted, moisture-regulated, and entirely invisible to foreign satellites. Pipes made from compressed clay and polymer, designed by Burkina Faso engineers and installed quietly at night. Cooling chambers linked by underground tunnels. Radiant heat displaced into bioresin domes. The system didn't buzz. It breathed. It was elegant, silent, and devastatingly efficient. When European dairy firms realized they couldn't explain how Faso Kosam's milk stayed cold from Burkina Faso to the coast of Benin without a single refrigerated truck, they sent a delegation to investigate. The report they returned with caused panic in Paris. There is no traditional cold chain. Their energy use is negligible, almost non-existent. Their carbon footprint is virtually zero, a senior consultant described. "It's like the system doesn't exist, and yet somehow it just works," another engineer added, shaking his head. That's when the accusations began. French patent lawyers filed a complaint with the World Intellectual Property Organization. They alleged that Faso underground cooling method violated 2 EU patents registered by a French AGRH firm 5 years earlier. The claim stated that the radiant displacement design and ceramic insulation ratios used by the Burkina Faso team bore a suspicious resemblance to those European prototypes. The French embassy in Ouagadougou issued a formal inquiry, requesting a freeze on exports until the matter could be resolved. Traoré didn't respond publicly. Instead, he scheduled a press conference. The room was packed. European reporters, African media, legal analysts, NGO observers. A French journalist asked the first question directly. "Captain Traoré, did your engineers copy French technology at all?" Before Traoré could speak, a hand rose at the back of the room. Jabari stepped forward carrying a faded folder. He walked to the front, placed it on the podium, and opened it. Inside were schematics. Hand-drawn, coffee-stained, dated and signed, diagrams of airflow, solar convergence calculations, clay pressure resistance tests. Each page was stamped with the emblem of the University of Ouagadougou. 2 years ago, Jabari began. This was my thesis, rejected by European journals, ignored by Western labs. Until today, it keeps our milk cold without a single drop of diesel. He held up a page dated April 19th, 2023. "That's your patent date?" he asked the French official in the room. The man didn't reply. Asha stepped up next. "Your country trained us to seek validation from abroad, but we stopped waiting. We validated ourselves, on our own soil," she declared. Salima, seated in the front row, clapped once. The room followed. Later that day, the Burkina Ministry of Justice released a statement. No European patent was used. No law was broken. What was broken was the illusion that innovation must wear a European face. Still, France persisted. The case moved to an international arbitration committee, but quickly unraveled. Independent experts confirmed the dates, the lab notes, the field tests were done long before the alleged French patent even existed. The original clay prototype still sat in the corner of Jabari's family home, its cracks and imperfections visible proof of origin. The French case collapsed. Traoré never gave a speech. He simply invited the press to tour the underground system. Reporters walked through sun-cooled tunnels, watched temperature sensors blink quietly, and touched the clay walls that held cool air like memory. A journalist from Nairobi whispered, "This isn't a pipeline. It's a spine, steady and alive." That night, a leaked internal email from the European Agriculture Council summed up the new fear. They didn't steal our future. They built theirs while we watched. And they had, not in laboratories, not with billion-dollar grants, but with clay, sweat, and silence. The kind of silence you don't notice until it feeds a continent. The conference hall in Brussels was built for applause. Velvet chairs, glass chandeliers, flags hanging in quiet rows. It was where global agricultural policy had been debated for decades, where farmers wore suits and milk was talked about in millions of litres, not poured into cups. But this year's EU Dairy Innovation Summit opened with a shock. On the main stage, behind a polished wooden podium, hung a banner no one expected to see. "Nourishing Faso, one glass at a time." Beneath it was an enlarged image of a Burkinabe boy, holding a carton of Faso Kosam, eyes wide, mid-smile, teeth stained white with milk. For the first time in memory, a European summit was featuring an African dairy system as a case study, not as aid recipient, but as inspiration. The presenter was a Dutch sustainability expert. She adjusted her glasses, cleared her throat, and began, "This model was designed without diesel, without refrigeration trucks, and completely without European engineering firms. And yet," she continued, "Faso Kosam now reliably delivers fresh milk across 5 countries, with an energy footprint lower than any EU dairy plant today." She clicked to the next slide. Clay cold chain designs, sensor charts, village-level production stats, no additives, no chemicals. Infant nutrition levels in recipient regions have improved by 12% in just 4 months, she said quietly. The data speaks clearly for itself. The room shifted. A few quiet nods, a few raised brows. In the crowd sat farmers from Germany, Poland, France, many of whom had struggled with rising energy costs, volatile subsidies, and corporate monopolies pushing smallholders out of business. To them, Faso Kosam wasn't a threat. It was a mirror, showing what they had lost in pursuit of scale. A French farmer leaned to his neighbor and said, "They built a system on trust and sunlight, while we built debt and paperwork." Another whispered softly, "And they did it without us. Without our help." In the lobby, conversations turned deeply personal. European citizens, especially younger delegates, began questioning the very logic of their food systems. Why couldn't their milk come from local cows cooled by the earth, not chemicals? Why had small farms vanished, replaced by factories? Meanwhile, media coverage spread fast. One Belgian outlet published a front-page piece titled, "Burkina Faso's Milk Revolution Puts Europe on the Defensive." A Danish TV panel openly debated whether the EU should import Burkina engineering talent to retrofit their own outdated infrastructure. A viral tweet showed a side-by-side photo. On the left, an EU milk plant with smokestacks and steel. On the right, the clay-chilled tunnels of Faso Kosam. The caption read, "One feeds profit, one feeds people." Back in Burkina Faso, Traoré watched it unfold from a quiet office. No celebration, no interviews, just a soft smile as he read messages pouring in from European citizens asking for blueprints, collaboration, guidance. "You seeing this?" Asha entered holding a tablet. "Yes," he replied softly. "They want our specs." He looked at her. "We'll share them freely." "You sure?" she asked. He nodded. "Because that's the point. It's not a secret. It's a seed." At the summit, a moment arrived no one saw coming. An Italian youth representative stood up during the Q&A and addressed the panel directly. "Why do we subsidize outdated systems? While Faso Kosam thrives on principles we abandoned, why are they leading the future? And we're debating how to preserve the past." Silence followed. Then one clap, then another. Then a wave of applause. Not for competition, but for clarity. Later that day, a European commissioner gave a closing remark. Faso Kosam reminds us of something deeper than innovation. It reminds us that dignity is scalable. And in that polished room of policies and panels, for the first time, the conversation wasn't about how to help Africa catch up. It was about how to catch up with Africa. Outside the venue, activists stood with signs reading, "We want milk that remembers where it came from." And under a drizzling Brussels sky, a carton of Faso Kosam sat on a newsstand, unopened but widely seen. The announcement came with the weight of a warning. The European Commission, backed by lobbying pressure from major dairy conglomerates, issued a resolution invoking trade sanctions on Burkina Faso. The reasoning was dressed in legal language. Unauthorized use of technology, destabilization of regional dairy markets, failure to comply with standard intellectual property protocols. But the message was plain. Burkina had gone too far, and they were going to pay for it. Within days, port authorities in multiple European-aligned countries began rejecting shipments of Foscom cartons and cold chain equipment. The financial arm of an international development bank froze an approved loan slated for the expansion of solar cooling tunnels. A French telecom provider quietly cut data access to the engineers managing the rural distribution systems. From Geneva to Berlin, a wall was going up. Not against a weapon, but against milk. At the presidential office in Ouagadougou, Traoré read the sanction list without speaking. Then he looked out the window, where children were lining up outside a neighborhood school, each holding an empty bottle waiting to be filled. Salima sat across from him. "They really think they can fold us," Traoré replied softly. "They don't know we bend like clay, and then rise." That afternoon, Traoré called a press conference. No flags, no advisors, just one podium, one mic, one sentence, he said. "You tried to stop a pipeline," he continued, "but pipelines were never the goal. The goal was multiplication." Reporters murmured in surprise. He paused, then declared, "Effective immediately, the government of Burkina Faso will release all technical designs, engineering blueprints, and cooling system documentation of the Faso model, free of charge to 12 partner nations across Africa." Gasps echoed. "We will not sell it. We will not license it. We will gift it," he stressed slowly. "What you tried to stop will now multiply." The room froze, then erupted into applause. By nightfall, embassies across the continent were calling for downloads. Ministries of Agriculture scrambled to send engineers. Delegates from Kenya, Uganda, Sierra Leone, Chad, Malawi, and Mozambique confirmed they had received the files. The documents came with a note, "Built by hands meant for many." Social media exploded. The hashtag Milk Multiplies trended from Lagos to Lusaka. Videos of African engineers opening the blueprints, assembling filtration units, and drilling clay insulation walls went viral within hours. A technician in Namibia posted a clip of a milk chiller humming quietly under the desert sun, captioned, "No patents, just progress." Europe watched in disbelief. A leaked internal report from a Scandinavian tech firm read, "We underestimated cultural alignment. They're not just exporting a product, they're exporting philosophy." Back in Burkina Faso, the engineers at the original plant didn't pause. Jabari led a team repurposing assembly lines to serve as training hubs. Asha coordinated remote teaching sessions with university labs in Kigali and Lusaka. Trucks that once carried cartons now carried instructors. In Cotonou, a Togolese minister held up a Faso Kosam manual and declared, "This is the first foreign policy made from milk, a recipe for dignity." The sanctions kept coming, but the resistance had already changed form. It wasn't Burkina Faso standing alone anymore. It was 12 nations, one blueprint, and a collective refusal to be fenced again. Traoré stood with Salima watching new recruits arrive at the training grounds. Some came with nothing but a backpack. Others carried old dairy manuals, ready to burn them for firewood. She asked him, "You think they'll build it like we did?" He shook his head. "No, they'll build it better, that's the point." A child ran past them carrying a small flag, not of Burkina Faso but of the African Union, drawn by hand, fluttering above a stick of sugarcane. That evening, in cities across the continent, projections of the Burkina Bay flag were beamed onto buildings, monuments, even embassy walls. One stood out in a public square in Nairobi, where the flag was overlaid with the words, "They tried to fold it. We made it fly." And it did. Higher than sanctions, louder than threats, carried not by wind, but by will. The bell rang just after sunrise, and barefoot children rushed into the courtyard of a small primary school in Zinari, holding empty metal cups and wide-eyed curiosity. What waited for them wasn't a textbook or a chalkboard or a foreign instructor with handouts, but a woman in a patterned wrap standing beside a steel milk drum mounted on a wooden cart, Salima. She stirred the drum slowly, the scent of warm milk rising with the morning breeze. Behind her were crates stacked with freshly filled cartons of Faso Kosam. No commercial label, no mascot, just a green stamp that read, "Made for you." One boy asked, "Is this from the city?" "No, child," she replied softly. "It's from the field." "Our field? The cows, you see. They eat what our mothers grow. They drink the water your fathers carry. This is your farm too." The boy nodded slowly, like something clicked inside. All across Burkina Faso, similar scenes played out. The Ministry of Education, under direct coordination with Faso Kosam leadership, had launched the Children of the Cow program, a school nutrition initiative designed to provide a daily cup of fresh milk to every enrolled child under the age of 12. It was more than a health campaign. It was a movement. Teachers saw children stay alert longer during class. Nurses reported fewer signs of anemia and vitamin deficiency. Parents noticed children asking questions, not just about milk, but about the land, the cows, the system. That's when the NGOs arrived. One particularly large international aid group based in London, with satellite offices in Dar es Salaam and Abidjan, released a press statement titled, "Modern Dairy for African Classrooms, a new model from our partners on the ground." Nowhere in the statement did it mention Faso Kosam. Nowhere did it mention Burkina Faso. The statement was accompanied by glossy brochures and promotional banners sent to local schools without permission. In them, the milk program was branded with a new name, Project Pure Chupe. The cartons were the same, the milk inside the same, but the labels bore the logo of the NGO, slogans in English, not in Marula. Asha saw the flyers first and stormed into the office, one clenched in her fist. "They're whitewashing it," she said firmly. "They've put their face on our harvest." Traoré remained calm. "Have we stopped feeding the children?" "No," she replied. "Then we feed them louder." Salima didn't wait for instructions. The next day, she returned to the Zinari school with 2 crates of milk and 1 small chalkboard. She sat up under a mango tree and wrote in giant letters, "This milk comes from here." She looked out at the children, now seated in a half circle, and said, "Your name isn't on their box, but it's in every drop. They don't get to own what your hands made." The teacher clapped. The children followed. Later that week, when a regional NGO representative arrived with branded tents and photo crews, Salima stood in front of the gate and asked, "Whose cows are in your pictures?" The woman hesitated. "We're trying to create a unified campaign image for global appeal." Salima stepped closer. "This isn't a campaign, it's a kitchen." She paused. "You don't walk into a woman's kitchen and rename her stew." The woman backed down silently. In response, Faso Kosam printed a new set of cartons, each stamped with illustrations drawn by students. Cows with wings, children holding buckets, fields with flags, every carton unique, every label rooted in a village hand. The campaign spread faster than any rebrand could contain. Soon, schools from Ghana and Niger requested visits. Student delegations came with notebooks asking how to build similar programs. Children began composing songs, chants, even poems about the milk and the land. In Ouagadougou, a public mural was painted by high school students. It showed a cow nursing a child beneath a baobab tree surrounded by books, pencils, and milk cartons. Across the top it read, "We don't drink aid, we drink home." The NGO quietly withdrew its rebranded materials and issued a vague apology. No one noticed. By then, the movement had outgrown permission. One afternoon, as Salima prepared to leave a school in Kaya, a girl tugged gently at her skirt. "Can I be a farmer?" she asked softly. Salima knelt and cupped her face. "You already are," she whispered kindly. "You just haven't milked your future yet." Behind them, a line of children waited. Not just for milk, but for memory. The factory was quiet. No reporters, no guards. Just the gentle hum of cooling systems and the faint clink of glass bottles rolling along the line. It was early, before dawn, and the first shift hadn't yet arrived, but the door opened anyway. Traoré stepped in barefoot, his uniform replaced by a plain linen tunic. No sash, no radio, no security. He walked slowly, like a man returning to something older than power. The concrete floor was cool beneath his feet. The smell hit him first. Sweet, earthy, alive milk. He passed the filtration room where the same clay coils they'd once called primitive now chilled half the continent's breakfast. He paused by the pasteurization chamber, brushing his hand along the control panel. His fingers left dust, he smiled. Down the hallway in the bottling wing, crates stood ready for shipment, each one hand-labeled by students in the Children of the Cow program. Some cartons had drawings of cows, others bore messages in crayon for Grandma. "Drink and grow. Thank you, Field." He walked further in and came to the last station, a hand-filling line used for small local orders. Behind it sat a single bottle, chilled and waiting, with a note folded under its cap. "Captain, taste it one last time," a gentle voice read on the card. It was signed, Salima. Traoré uncapped the bottle, poured a glass, and held it to his lips. He didn't drink immediately. He watched the liquid catch the faint light, swirling calmly like a storm, remembered but past. Then he sipped. Warm, clean, real. A voice echoed from behind. Soft, high. "Does it still taste like it used to?" He turned. A young girl stood there, holding a notebook and a small bucket. Barefoot too, maybe 10 years old. She stepped closer, watching his face. He nodded. "Even better," he said softly. She poured herself a glass from the same bottle, careful not to spill a drop. Then she drank. When she finished, she looked up and whispered, "Tastes like home." He didn't answer. He couldn't. He only reached forward gently, wiped a drop of milk from her chin, and handed her his glass. "You'll be in charge of the next one," he said. Her eyes widened. "Me?" He nodded. "Every revolution needs a refill." The girl giggled and ran down the corridor. Footsteps light, voice echoing into the quiet. "Tell them I'm coming." He stayed behind. Traoré looked around the plant, now bathed in the faintest morning light, everything still, everything alive. He walked past the main doors again, past rows of hanging uniforms, past Salima's chalkboard where someone had scribbled yesterday's count, 14, 6 and 20 children fed. He ran his hand over the numbers and whispered to no one, "We didn't just make milk, we made belief." Outside, the sky turned soft gold. In a nearby classroom, the first bell rang. and in the far corner of the factory, a pump started its hum. It would be a full day, many more to feed. But in that moment, the president, who still smelled of milk, walked slowly toward the light, quiet, smiling, and free. He paused at the doorway, taking in the soft hum, the scent of milk, the quiet promise of another day. Behind him, children would wake to drink what their hands helped build. Ahead of him, a continent stirred with a different kind of hunger. One for dignity, for self-determination, for something that tasted like home. Traoré didn't build a factory, he built a future. Not through speeches, but through steps taken barefoot, through belief poured into bottles and shared without permission. And now perhaps the real question is this: what does your food remember? Would you recognize your own story in what fills your plate? Could your community build what they did? Something lasting, honest, and shared? If this story stayed with you, if Traoré, the field, and that bottle of milk meant something, then let someone else hear it too. Give it a like, share it with someone who still believes in better, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next one. Millions were on the table, a future paved with offers, contracts, and comforts. But he chose the dust beneath his feet, the hum of quiet machines, and a child's drawing on a milk carton. Thanks for being here. We'll be back soon with the next one. Until then, look after each other, keep your feet on the ground and your heart wide open.